I never imagined my wedding day would begin with a room full of folding chairs, secondhand books, and the faint smell of old paper. The library's sunlit windows cast golden stripes across the floor, and somewhere in the back, kids' drawings still hung from last month's art program. It wasn't the kind of venue my family bragged about over cocktails. It wasn't the kind of place they would even step into without a reason. But for me, it was perfect because this was the place where everything began. I could already hear my father's voice from the front row, low but sharp enough to travel. A library. What will people think? My mother, in her pressed navy dress, shifted uncomfortably, scanning the shelves like they might judge her too. They didn't know. They didn't know that this library had seen the first time I taught a child to read. The first moment I realized changing one life could feel like changing the world. And they didn't know who was coming today, a guest who would change the way they looked at me forever. 5 years ago, they stopped asking about my life. They didn't want to hear about budget meetings for after-school programs or the struggle to keep kids from dropping out. They wanted me to work at the family company, wear tailored suits, host dinners with the right people. I chose something different. And in their eyes, I chose wrong. I learned to live with that silence, filling it with the voices of the students who needed me, the colleagues who believed in me, and the mentors who taught me that impact mattered more than image. This day, this wedding was never about proving them wrong. It was about standing in the place where I found my purpose and promising to build a future rooted in that same purpose. But as I adjusted my simple white dress in the mirror, my phone buzzed with a message I almost didn't check. And when I did, my hands went still. It was from Governor Helena Brooks. Running late, Air Force One just landed. I'll be there in 10. Don't start without me. My heart started pounding. She was really coming. When Daniel and I told people we were getting married at the Old West Side Community Library, most smiled politely, the kind of smile people use when they're trying not to judge. I could almost hear the unspoken questions. Why not a banquet hall? Why not somewhere nicer? But this place wasn't just a building to me. It was where a forgotten warehouse had been turned into something beautiful. Rows of books, a small stage for readings, and a children's corner that had seen more laughter than most grand ballrooms ever would. It felt alive with stories, including my own. Years ago, when the paint on the walls was still fresh, I volunteered here on Saturdays. At first, I thought I'd just be helping kids find books. Instead, I found myself helping them find courage to read out loud, to ask questions, to dream bigger than the block they lived on. I remember one boy, Marcus, who came in every week pretending to just browse. It took 3 visits before he admitted he couldn't read. By the end of the summer, he was devouring mystery novels like candy. Those walls had seen him change, and they had seen me change too. To my family, a wedding venue was a statement of status. To me, it was a statement of values. I didn't want chandeliers. I wanted shelves lined with books. I didn't want marble floors. I wanted the worn carpet where children had sat cross-legged listening to their first story. I knew my family would never understand, at least not right away, but I wasn't planning this wedding to meet their expectations. I was planning it to honor the place that gave me my start. In my heart, I knew that was worth more than any country club reservation. Looking back, I think this is where many of us get caught. We measure our milestones by other people's rulers. We choose what will photograph well, what will impress, rather than what will truly mean something years from now. But meaning doesn't come from price tags. It comes from connection. The connection I felt to this library was the same connection I hoped to carry into my marriage, built, slowly cared for daily, and made richer by the people inside it. That was my quiet rebellion, and also my quiet gift to Daniel. As I stood in the staff room turned dressing area, the distant hum of guests settling into folding chairs reached me. Daniel had stepped out to greet his parents, and I took a moment to breathe, to let the history of this place wrap around me. I didn't know that in just a few minutes something would happen to shift the focus entirely. My choice of venue had already raised eyebrows, but the arrival of one particular guest would turn those raised eyebrows into wide-eyed disbelief and change the way my family saw me forever. When my family pictured my career, they imagined me in a tailored suit, closing deals, maybe standing beside my father at a company ribbon cutting. Instead, I chose a path they couldn't understand: education reform for underserved communities. To them, it sounded like charity work, not a real career. They never asked what my days looked like. If they had, they'd have known they weren't filled with idle hours, but with crowded classrooms, budget battles, and long talks with parents who had lost faith in the system. My job wasn't glamorous, but it was urgent, and every day mattered. My first years were the hardest. I started as a program coordinator in a struggling district where dropout rates topped 70%. The classrooms had broken blinds, outdated books, and teachers stretched so thin they barely had time to breathe. I remember meeting Jasmine, a bright girl who had stopped coming to school because she couldn't afford bus fare. We found her a pass through a local sponsor, and 3 years later, she walked across the stage in a cap and gown. That day, I knew this work was worth more than any salary figure my family could imagine. Over time, I climbed not through corporate ladders, but through impact. I designed after-school programs that brought dropout rates down by half in just 2 years. I built partnerships with nonprofits to provide free meals, tutoring, and mentorship. My proudest moments weren't promotions they were hearing from former students who had gone on to college trade schools or started small businesses of their own. Yet none of this made it into family conversations. They didn't ask, and I stopped volunteering information that would only meet polite nods and quick subject changes. The truth is, many people misunderstand work like mine. They think the rewards have to be financial to be valid. But there are other currencies, the smile of a child who finally understands a math problem. The phone call from a parent who says, "Thank you, my son loves school again." Those moments don't show up on resumes or LinkedIn profiles, but they are the truest form of wealth I know. It took me years to stop measuring my worth by their standards and start valuing it by my own. That's why my position today matters so much to me, not because of the title, but because of what it represents. As Director of Statewide Educational Reform, I oversee programs reaching thousands of students. My team has cut absenteeism rates, expanded literacy programs, and introduced arts back into schools that had cut them years ago. These aren't just numbers, they're lives changing. And as I adjusted my veil that morning, I knew the people sitting in the front row had no idea about any of it. But someone else did, and she was on her way to make sure they finally heard the truth. I first met Governor Helena Brooks 3 years ago at a small education conference in a converted warehouse downtown. It wasn't the kind of event with red carpets or press coverage, just folding chairs, lukewarm coffee, and people who cared deeply about fixing broken systems. I had been invited to speak on a panel about community-based solutions, and I remember scanning the room not realizing she was there. I wasn't trying to impress anyone important. I was speaking to the teachers, volunteers, and parents who lived these challenges every day. That honesty was what caught her attention. After my talk, a tall woman in a navy blazer approached me, her presence commanding, but her smile warm. "You've just described the problem better than most policy briefs I've read," she said. I realized then who she was. Instead of the quick handshake I expected, we ended up talking for nearly 40 minutes about dropout prevention, about the need for mentorship programs, about the gap between classroom theory and real-life application. She didn't just nod politely, she asked hard questions and actually listened to my answers. That conversation changed everything. 2 weeks later, I got a call from her office asking if I'd join a pilot project to reform after-school programs across the state. It was a leap, more responsibility, more scrutiny, but also an opportunity I couldn't turn down. For the next year, I worked side by side with her team, navigating everything from budget proposals to pushback from districts resistant to change. We disagreed sometimes, but that only deepened our respect for each other. She valued evidence over ego, and that made her rare in politics. I learned more in those months than in my first 5 years combined. Working with Governor Brooks taught me that influence isn't always about titles or visibility, it's about trust. She trusted me to lead projects that could fail publicly if they didn't work, and I trusted her to have my back when tough decisions drew criticism. Together, we rolled out mentorship programs that paired at-risk teens with local business owners, increasing graduation rates in pilot schools by nearly 20%. These weren't abstract wins. They were real, measurable changes in kids' lives. I knew then that this partnership was more than professional, it was personal. The following year, she invited me to serve as director of a statewide initiative. My family never knew about that promotion. They didn't ask, and I didn't tell. But Helena knew every late night, every tough call, every victory and setback. She became more than a governor, she became a mentor, and in many ways, a stand-in family member who believed in me without conditions. That's why when she offered to attend my wedding, I thought she was simply being kind. I never imagined she would actually show up. But as that morning unfolded, I was about to learn that when Helena Brooks made a promise, she kept it, and her arrival would change the room in an instant. From the staff room where I was getting ready, I could hear the low hum of conversation filtering through the thin walls. It wasn't just small talk. It was the kind of hushed, half-whispered commentary people think you can't hear. "A library wedding," someone murmured. "What a choice." My father's voice rose just enough to cut through the buzz. "I still don't know how she's affording any of this." My mother said nothing, but I could picture her pursed lips, the same look she gave me at family dinners when I talked about grant writing instead of market trends. Daniel poked his head in his tie, slightly crooked eyes soft with reassurance. "Everything's fine out there," he said. But I caught the flicker of irritation he tried to hide. We'd talked about this, how my family measured worth in ways that had nothing to do with the vows we were about to make. "Don't let it get to you," he added, and I smiled, though my stomach felt tight. In moments like this, it's easy to forget that the opinions swirling around us are just background noise, not the truth of who we are. I thought of Marcus, the boy from my early volunteer days, and how nervous he'd been to read in front of his class for the first time. "Pretend they're not there," I'd told him. "Focus on the words." That advice worked for him, and it worked for me now. I adjusted my dress, breathed in slowly, and let my focus settle on the promises Daniel and I would make. The whispers, I decided, could stay in the background. What mattered was the life we were building, not the commentary. Still, there's a strange weight to hearing people doubt you in real time. It's like carrying a bag you never packed, but somehow still have to lug around. In a way, that's what the last 5 years had been, a constant hauling of others' perceptions, trying not to let them drag me down. The truth is, we can't control the stories people tell about us, but we can decide which ones we believe. That's a lesson I wish I'd learned sooner, but one I was determined to live by today. I was fastening the last button on my sleeve when my phone buzzed. At first, I almost ignored it. Who texts a bride minutes before she walks down the aisle? But when I glanced at the screen and saw Helena Brooks' name, my breath caught. "Running late, Air Force One just landed. I'll be there in 10. Don't start without me." My heart leapt, not from nerves this time, but from anticipation. Out in the main room, the whispers were still circling. In just a few minutes, they would stop, entirely replaced by a silence thick with surprise. It started with a sound that didn't belong at a wedding, a low rumble growing louder until even the chatter in the main room began to fade. I peeked through the side window and saw 3 black SUVs pulling up in front of the library, the kind with tinted windows and small flags on the front. 2 men in dark suits stepped out first, scanning the area with the kind of focus that makes people instinctively straighten their backs. Guests turned in their seats, craning their necks. Someone whispered, "Is that Secret Service?" and the air seemed to thicken with curiosity. From where I stood, I could see the front doors swing open. And there she was, Governor Helena Brooks, stepping into the library like it was the grandest hall in the state. She wasn't in campaign mode. She was in her element, confident but warm, her navy suit crisp, her smile genuine. "Sorry I'm late," she said to the room, her voice carrying effortlessly. Air Force One was delayed, and then the motorcade hit traffic. The laughter that followed was brief, but stunned. Half the room wasn't sure if she was serious. She was. My father's jaw was visibly slack, his hands resting awkwardly on his knees. My mother blinked rapidly, as if she might wake up from a strange dream at any moment. Even Ethan and Vanessa, usually so quick with remarks, were silent. I could almost feel the shift happening, how quickly a narrative changes when confronted with undeniable proof. They had known nothing of my work with her. They hadn't cared to ask. And yet here she was in the flesh, greeting me like family in front of everyone. Helena walked toward me with steady steps, her security detail keeping a polite distance. "You didn't think I'd miss this, did you?" she said as she reached me. She took my hands, squeezing them like a mother would before sending her child into something important. "You've built something extraordinary, Emily, and today we celebrate that along with you and Daniel." Her words were simple, but in this room, they carried the weight of years of unspoken truths. I felt my eyes sting, not from surprise, but from the relief of finally being seen. Moments like that teach you something essential. Sometimes the validation you've been waiting for won't come from where you expect. We grow up thinking our worth should be recognized first, by the people closest to us. But life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes it takes an outside voice, one with authority and perspective, to cut through years of misunderstanding. As Helena turned to greet my parents, I knew this was more than just a wedding day twist. This was the moment the story they'd been telling about me would change forever. Helena didn't just greet my parents politely, she turned toward the room and began speaking as if she were delivering a keynote address. I've had the privilege of working alongside Emily Carter for the past 3 years. She said, her voice steady and certain. Her programs have transformed the way our state supports its most vulnerable students. You could have heard a pin drop. My father was frozen in place. My mother's hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were pale. My siblings leaned forward unconsciously, as if pulling the words toward themselves to make sure they didn't miss a single one. She is the director of our statewide education reform initiative. Helena continued a position she earned through hard work, vision, and results. Under her leadership, graduation rates have risen, dropout rates have fallen, and students who had been forgotten now have a path forward. She didn't list statistics like a report, she told stories. About Marcus, who learned to read at 16. About Jasmine, who found her way back to school after nearly dropping out. These were my victories shared in front of people who had once dismissed them as irrelevant. I watched my family's expressions shift from polite surprise to genuine astonishment. This wasn't a resume bullet point. This was a legacy they'd never bothered to see. And as much as part of me wanted to say, "See, this is what I've been doing," another part of me simply felt relief. It's exhausting carrying the weight of proving yourself to people who have already decided you failed. In that moment, Helena lifted that weight off my shoulders, not by defending me, but by celebrating me without hesitation. The lesson here is one I wish I'd learned earlier. When you live authentically in your purpose, the right people will notice even if the ones you love don't. At least not at first. Recognition is powerful, but it matters most when it's anchored in truth. Helena wasn't painting a flattering picture. She was naming the reality of my work. And hearing it out loud made it real for my family in a way my explanations never could. They could dismiss my words, but they couldn't dismiss hers. When she finished, Helena placed a hand on my shoulder and smiled at me like she knew exactly what this moment meant. Now she said, glancing toward the arch of flowers we'd set up at the end of the aisle, "I believe there's a wedding to attend." Laughter rippled through the room, but I could feel the undercurrent of something else, questions, reevaluations, maybe even the beginnings of pride. As we walked together toward the front, I knew the ceremony would be more than vows. It would be the first time my family saw me as I truly was. The ceremony ended in a blur of vows, applause, and the soft rustle of guests shifting in their seats. As Daniel and I stepped aside to greet people, I saw my father moving toward me with an expression I hadn't seen in years. Hesitant, almost unsure. My mother was just behind him, her hands folded, eyes darting between me and Helena, who now sat quietly in the front row. "Emily," my father began, his voice low, "I think I owe you an apology. Maybe more than one." My mother nodded, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. They were searching for the right words. "I didn't realize," my father tried again, "I didn't realize the scope of what you were doing." It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. For once he wasn't talking down to me or waiting for his turn to explain why I was wrong. "We thought," my mother added carefully, "that you were settling, that you were avoiding real success." I took a breath, remembering the countless phone calls I'd hung up feeling unheard. "You didn't ask," I said gently. "And after a while I stopped trying to tell you. It hurt too much." It's strange how hard truths can land softer when the other person is finally ready to receive them. I told them how it felt to be cut out of holidays, how I had to learn to stop measuring my worth by their standards. I shared how I'd poured myself into the work, late nights, difficult negotiations, moments when failure felt close enough to taste. I could see them processing each detail, another brick removed from the wall that had stood between us for years. My siblings edged closer, listening quietly, their earlier smirks replaced with something more thoughtful. Ethan finally spoke. "We just didn't get it. We thought you were wasting your degree," Vanessa added. "We compared you to us because it was the only measure we knew." Their honesty stung, but it also cracked something open. "Success isn't one size fits all," I said. "Impact matters too. Sometimes more." I told them about Marcus, about Jasmine, about the schools that had transformed because someone believed in the students enough to fight for them. These weren't abstract policies, they were lives. And slowly I saw their faces shift from defensiveness to something closer to respect. The lesson in moments like this is simple, but hard to live by. You can't force people to see your worth. You can only live it consistently until one day the truth is too clear to ignore. As the conversation wound down, my father placed his hand over mine. "We'd like to know more," he said. "Not just today, really no." I nodded, feeling something in my chest loosen. The music for the reception began to play in the background, and for the first time in years, I wanted my family to be part of the next chapter. Later, as the reception settled into a gentle rhythm of clinking glasses and quiet conversations, my father looked around the library with new eyes. "You chose this place on purpose, didn't you?" he asked, not accusingly this time, but with genuine curiosity. I smiled. "Yes. This is where it all started." I told them how the library had once been an abandoned warehouse, transformed by volunteers into a safe haven for kids. It was here I first saw what community could do when it refused to give up on its children. That belief had shaped every step of my career since. I walked them over to the children's corner where colorful beanbags sat in a small circle and hand-painted signs encouraged reading adventures. "Right here," I said, "was where I met Marcus for the first time." He pretended to be looking for a sports magazine, but really he didn't know how to read. We started with picture books, then short stories, then novels. By the end of that summer, he was reading aloud to younger kids. My mother touched one of the worn book spines, her fingers lingering like she could feel the weight of that transformation. "This isn't just a venue," I explained. "It's a symbol. Every big thing I've done started with something small here. One child, one conversation, one new idea. When I planned this wedding, I didn't want marble floors or crystal chandeliers. I wanted a place that reminded me what success really looks like. Lives touched opportunities, created futures, rewritten." My siblings listened quietly, their eyes tracing the rows of books, perhaps realizing that impact leaves marks far deeper than any trophy or award. The lesson here is one I hold close: beginnings matter. Where you start shapes how you see the world. For me, starting here taught me that you don't need perfect conditions to make a difference. You just need commitment and people willing to try. This library was never about grandeur, it was about possibility. And possibility, I've learned, can turn the most ordinary spaces into sacred ones. I wanted my marriage to begin with that same foundation: purpose over prestige, meaning over image. As the evening went on, I noticed my family mingling with guests from my work teachers program, volunteers, even a few former students who'd grown into young adults. They were hearing stories that didn't come from me, but from the people whose lives had been changed. And I could see it sinking in. For the first time, my family wasn't just visiting my world, they were stepping into it. And in that moment, I knew the next conversation we had wouldn't be about justifying my choices, but about building something new together. As the night wound down, I found myself standing by the library doors, watching my family laugh with people they'd only just met. A few hours earlier, these worlds had felt miles apart. Now they were sharing stories over coffee and cake, leaning in to listen like every word mattered. It struck me how much had changed, not in the facts of my work, but in their willingness to see them. The gap between us had been built over years of misunderstanding. Tonight had been about closing it, one conversation at a time, in the very place where my own journey began. I thought about everything that had led here: the quiet Saturdays spent reading with kids who thought books weren't for them, the long nights writing grant proposals, the moments of doubt when it felt like nothing was changing. And then the milestones: new programs launched, dropout rates, lowered, students stepping into futures they once thought were out of reach. Those victories had been mine long before my family recognized them. But hearing Helena speak today had given them shape, weight, and a place in the story my family now knew by heart. The lesson I'm taking from this day is simple: success is not a single definition handed down by others. It's the sum of the choices you make, the lives you touch, and the courage it takes to keep going when no one is clapping yet. We can't always choose when people will see our worth, but we can choose to live it every single day. And when the recognition finally comes, it's sweeter for having been earned in the dark. That's the kind of legacy I want to build in my marriage and in my work. As Daniel and I packed away the last of the decorations, I knew this day would be remembered for more than just our vows. It was the day my family saw me for who I am, and the day we all learned that there's more than one way to measure a life well lived. If my story resonates with you, I'd love for you to share it. Tell me in the comments, how do you define success? And if you believe in stories that honor purpose over prestige, like this one, please like, share, and subscribe. There are more journeys to tell, and I'd be honored to share them with you.